Hi there, I'm John Fish. I'm a Harvard sophomore, and recently I've been thinking a lot about my relationship with technology. So in my last video, a week ago, I talked about this idea and I kind of debunked this narrative that smartphones and social media are destroying a generation and causing a mental health crisis. If you look at the facts, it's just not true. Today, I want to talk about why, even though they're not destroying a generation and there's no mental health crisis, why you should still strongly consider limiting your technology, because I'm a huge proponent of doing this. And so in this video, my goal is to share with you the beginnings of a framework that I've been thinking about pretty deeply for the last few weeks, and I call it intentional attention. Let's dive into it. In the early 1800s, something interesting happened. Newspapers got really cheap. The idea with this was kind of that rather than making money off of transactions, that is, charging more money for every newspaper and therefore driving more profit, they could sell newspapers at a loss, but make a greater profit from placing advertisements, thereby profiting off of the attention of their readers. This idea proved to be a super valuable business plan. It worked out really well and has continued to propagate into modern businesses today, and the digital world only accelerated this. In a nutshell, you can think about this as kind of the difference between Walmart and Facebook's business model. Walmart relies on a lot of transactions. They give you a good in exchange for money, whereas Facebook is totally free for everyone to use, but there are ads everywhere. And so it's two different ways of being immensely profitable companies. So what's really crazy to me is just how much this digital revolution in the attention economy has exploded in the past couple of decades. In 1997, according to the IAB, which tracks this type of stuff, digital ad spend was around $900 million. And in 2017, it was around $88 billion. And today, two of the 5 most valuable companies in America, Google and Facebook, I guess Alphabet now and Facebook, rely on ad revenue as their primary source of revenue. So companies that couldn't have existed 20 years ago are now some of the most valuable companies that we have in our economy. So if you do the math, right, from 900 million to 88 billion in 20 years, you're looking at an average growth rate of around 25% every year. And this is obviously like a huge number for anyone that, knows about economics. Like, that's big. And so the question is, what's been driving that, right? So Google and Facebook and other companies that are relying on this ad money and essentially this attention for their revenue have had to get exponentially better year over year at capturing our attention. So now I want to talk about why this might be a bad thing. When Facebook launched in 2004, it was cool, but ultimately it was a pretty trivial service. And similarly, when iPhones were launched and when Blackberries were launched, they were little more than kind of glorified iPods, music listening devices, and email sending devices. But now, less than 2 decades later, over 70% of Americans own smartphones, and on average, they're spending about 2 hours every day on social media. And maybe more dangerously, according to Nielsen, the average adult American is spending upwards of 11 hours a day consuming digital media. 11 hours a day. Digital media has pervaded almost every aspect of our lives. We're watching it while we eat. We're watching it when we have free time, sometimes at work. And so in this way, in a very short period of time, digital media, including social media, has taken over increasingly large amounts of our life. When I say 11 hours, that's an increase over last quarter, which was an increase over last quarter, and so on. It seems that we are spending more and more time consuming this type of media. It's getting to the point where free time without digital media, for most people, is becoming a thing of the past. You're constantly connected to your phone, on Netflix, on your laptop, whatever the case may be. It's getting to the point where people are just spending no time disconnected. So a good question to ask is how did this happen, right? How did these products kind of evolve in this way? And when I say evolve, it actually kind of sets up a framework for thinking about this, right? We can think about the evolution of these products as literally evolution. We can think about it as some sort of hyper-efficient, engineer-aided natural selection. the networks which succeed and which others come in and copy and modify are the ones that get the most attention from their users. And once we have that, we can start to understand how, as an ecosystem of products, gradually we are giving more and more attention to it because they are getting more and more efficient at taking our attention. But, is this really such a bad thing? Well, I would argue yes. And the reason that I argue yes, I think, is summed up very nicely in one quote by Mary Oliver. So in her essay Upstream, Oliver says, "Attention is the beginning of devotion." And you can really read this in a few ways. So one, you can read this as, if you're dedicating a lot of attention to Facebook, to Twitter, to Instagram, you start to become devoted to those services. And do you really want to be someone who is devoted to Instagram? That is your defining characteristic? That's not me, right? But another way to read this is by kind of looking at what you're not dedicating attention to. So if you want to be someone who's devoted to something important, right? If you want to make a difference in the world, if you want to have some impact, you need to dedicate attention to things other than social media, to things other than your phone, to things other than YouTube videos, right? If you want to become a more charitable person, right, you actually need to get out there and start contributing. If you want to become a more educated person, you need to get out there and start learning. No matter what you want to do with your life, you have to dedicate attention to it. Attention is fundamentally what allows us to be human. If you want to foster good relationships with people, you have to give attention to them, right? So if you're giving increasing amounts of attention to social platforms, to digital platforms, then you're taking away attention from, again, ultimately the things which make us human, right? I don't want to be a robot that spends all of my free time on Instagram and Twitter. I want to be an interesting, creative, well-educated, kind person who has relationships with people in real life. So it's not so much for me that Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc., that they're bad, right? I don't think that they're bad. I just think that spending all of your attention in one place like that is not wise. The habitual use of social media does not facilitate my achieving of what I want to achieve. I want to do things with my life. I don't want to just sit around on my phone all the time. And so, I need to take attention away from these apps by limiting how I use them. And that frees up attention for the things that I want to do, the things which bring me joy and happiness and the things that I will look back with satisfaction later on in life. So, now that you're aware of this, hopefully you've been able to follow kind of this evolutionary model, how products have gotten more adept at taking our attention, and why this is a bad thing, primarily because it takes away the ability for you to dedicate that attention to other things in your life which are more important to you. So we've understood that, so how do we fix it, right? Well, it turns out it's actually pretty easy. So I'm going to share with you some of the tips that I've been doing to limit my attention that I give to technology. Okay, so luckily it's actually pretty easy to limit your technology once you become aware of why you want to do it. The really hard part is understanding why and kind of justifying to yourself. But once you have an understanding that it's because you want to dedicate attention to other things, it becomes very easy. So think about what matters to you. What is it that you actually want to spend your time on? So once you have that in mind, it's time to actually start replacing your technology use. So the attention that you're dedicating to technology. And this is where, Cal Newport and digital minimalism really hits it, out of the park. He has some really, really great examples of how people are doing this. But I want to share with you kind of 3 ways in which I've been limiting my own technology use and that I've found to be pretty darn effective. So the first way, I went through my phone and I basically, according to Cal Newport's kind of he calls it a technology filter, I believe, which is basically asking this question, like, does this provide something which I deeply value, and is it the best way that I can get this value? I probably deleted, 50 to 100 apps. And then the other thing that I did is I turned off notifications for all of the other ones except for my direct communication apps. So the second thing that I did was, after kind of renovating my phone like this, I realized that it was mostly useless for like 90% of my day, in that I only really needed to use my phone for like navigation, for, calling an Uber or a Lyft if I needed to get across Boston to the airport or whatever, or for calling people. But, I'm going to know in advance if I have any of those 3 things on my schedule. And so I'll bring my phone with me if I, have to call someone in the middle of the day or whatever. But if I don't, I'll just leave my phone behind. And this was scary at first, but ultimately very freeing. And it freed up time for me to do what is, my third activity, which is just replacing this passive leisure with active leisure. So passive leisure being kind of, I wonder what's new on Instagram today. I'm going to refresh. I wonder what's on Reddit today. Oh, wow, that's interesting. And kind of falling into the rabbit hole that we all fall into with that. These products are very good at making you fall into those rabbit holes. Active leisure, on the other hand, is intentionally doing something because it's something that you want to do. So for me, a big active leisure in my life recently has been reading. So over the past weekend, I read 2.5 books. So not long books, obviously, about 500 pages of reading in total, but primarily just through spending the time that I would have spent otherwise, watching Netflix, watching YouTube on my phone, to just reading. And it was awesome. I loved it. If you're not a big reader, you could do any number of things. You could build something. You could just go on a walk, right? There are all sorts of things that you can do which are healthy for you. They're good for you. So even though social media might not be bad for you, if you dedicate that attention to things that are good for you, you're going to feel a lot better. So what I'm hoping that you got out of this video was this idea that even though social media might not be something which is destroying a generation and causing us to be on the brink of a mental health crisis, it is taking a lot of our attention. And by being more intentional with our attention, we can reap huge benefits by spending our attention on the things which we actually value and which we know will make us better people. So I've actually started to write a book on this because it's a problem that fascinates me deeply, and I think I can kind of present an interesting point of view as someone who has worked in the software and also in the social media influence and also in the academic field, so I can parse the psychology studies that are, often misinterpreted. And so I think I can kind of provide a valuable perspective on that. So I'm not sure where it's going to go. I'm about 30 pages deep. Obviously, I'm in the middle of school right now. I'm still trying to do these videos. I have extracurricular commitments, so it's going to be a little while before it's done. But if you want to follow along and be notified when it releases, then definitely subscribe to the channel. Maybe click that bell notification so that you can be here whenever I post a video, as well as subscribe to my email newsletter, which is not something that I actively use a lot of the time, but when I release this book, you will be among the first to know if you're subscribed to the email newsletter. So, link to that in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at TheJohnFish. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was valuable to you, and I hope that you consider some of the things that I said. So, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.